One kid killing the parents is a bad seed. Two kids killing the parents is a bad family.
And where was it kept at that house?
It was in my parents' bedroom.
And when he came back with the knife, what did he do with it, if anything?
He put it on my neck. He put his hand on my head and put the knife on my neck.
And did he hurt you with it?
No.
Did he threaten you with it?
Yes.
What did he say?
He said I should kill you, and next time I will.
And did you believe him?
Yes.
And following that, did he then demand an act of sex from you? Your Honor, may we approach? Did he then demand something from you?
Yes.
What?
Sex.
And did you comply?
Yes.
Did you complain?
No.
Did you resist?
No.
Did you say no?
No.
Did you just do it?
Yes.
And had he on this occasion requested that you go into a particular position that was unusual?
Yes.
And what was unusual about it?
It was that I put my knees on the edge of the bed.
Well, hadn't he asked you to do that before?
Yes, but it was unusual. It only happened 3 times in my life.
Was there a mirror in this room, Mr. Menendez?
Yes.
And were you positioned in some way with respect to the mirror?
Yes.
And is that what was unusual about this as well?
That only happened twice in my life.
Well, was this one of the times that happened?
Yes.
And did he make you look?
Yes.
And how did you feel about that experience afterwards?
I really hated myself.
And did you feel that you would be resisting him again in the future?
No.
Was there a thought that would go through your mind when your father was having sex with you concerning dying?
Yes.
What was that thought? And I'm focusing now on when you were in California, when you were a teenager.
I just wanted more than anything else that when I died, that no one would find out that this was happening to me.
When these sexual things were happening with your father, did you think that you might die?
Yes.
Did you understand how or why?
No, I just felt like I was gonna die. It just was so horrible that I wanted to die, and I felt like I was gonna die. I just didn't want to die with anyone knowing.
You didn't want to die in the middle of it.
No.
Is that what you meant?
Understand the question?
Yes. I definitely did not want to die in the middle of it.
And if you had died in the middle of it, what might happen?
People would know
People would know what?
that I was having sex with my father.
Did any of that thought enter your mind on Sunday night, August 20th, 1989?
Yes.
And how did it enter your mind that night?
I thought he was going to kill me that night, and I thought he was going to have sex with me first.
And did that flash to any previous thoughts you had had?
Any what?
Previous thoughts. Thoughts you had had earlier in your
It was
life.
a thought.
That's the whole question.
Okay. When you were thinking that your father might have sex with you on the night of August 20th and kill you, okay, did that remind you of these earlier thoughts you had about not wanting to die in the middle of a sex act with your father?
No, it didn't have to remind me. It was always in my head. It was always there.
Well, was it there then, Mr. Menendez?
Yes, it was there.
Let's go back, if we can, to when you're living in New Jersey. Do you remember, let me strike that. Did you have an opportunity in the last few months to look over your school records from the Princeton Day School?
Yes.
And did you read the comments that all your teachers had written about you over those years?
Yes.
And was there something that you remember experiencing as a school child at school related to what was happening at home?
Certainly.
What were you experiencing at school? And when I say related to happening at home, I mean to the sexual activity with your father. Do you understand that?
Yes.
And what would happen at school?
I would lose my concentration, and I would wander off.
And were you aware of doing it at the time?
Sometimes I was aware when I snapped out of it.
And what would be the thought or thoughts or pictures or images that would cause you to lose your concentration?
Anything could cause me to lose my concentration. The way somebody looked at me reminded me of my father, or what somebody was wearing, if my father had been wearing that, or a box, the way it was positioned, anything, didn't matter.
But was it related to the sex with your father?
Yes.
And when you reviewed the school records, did you see things in those records that reminded you of these concentration problems?
Well, it talked about it all over the school records.
Back up a little.
I
Who
saw
talked about it?
my teachers.
What did they say?
They said that I had a serious problem in concentrating during tests, during class, school, and at any time, that I wouldn't be able to concentrate very well, that I would get very nervous and anxious.
Well, weren't you a pretty nervous, anxious person since the time you were a little boy?
Yes, I was.
And did this sex with your father, you think, make you calmer and more relaxed and more
Definitely
comfortable?
not. It didn't make me more nervous for school. It just made me real paranoid
Paranoid of what?
of giving myself away.
And do you remember when you were living in New Jersey, practicing tennis and playing in matches and having concentration problems?
Yes.
And were any of those concentration problems related to, in your mind, in your memory, the sex with your father?
Yes, that's what they related to.
Do you remember hearing here various teachers and coaches talking about you spacing out?
Yes.
Did you know when you were younger that you spaced out?
Yes.
And is that the same as the concentration problems, or is that different?
That's what he was talking about.
Mr. Menendez, in your family, who is in charge of the sports and who is in charge of the school as far as you were concerned? As far as your life was concerned?
Well, my mom drove me every place in the sports, but she definitely controlled the school.
Okay, you have to back up because every other word now. She drove you to the sports, but who was in charge of deciding what the sports training would be, what sports you'd be involved in?
My father.
And in talking about your mother, what was her involvement with your learning process? If you understand the question.
Yeah, she would basically train me in school.
She trained you in the school?
No,
Or?
about schoolwork.
Okay. Your mother was a school teacher once upon a time, wasn't she?
Yes.
Is that what she had wanted to be?
No.
Did she tell you what she had wanted to be?
Yes.
What had she wanted to be?
She wanted to be something in communications, like a radio anchor or an anchor woman or something like that.
Did she want to have a career in the entertainment industry?
Yes.
Did she ever talk about wanting to be an actress or a model or anything like that?
Sometimes, but mostly she wanted to do. She was a very good speaker, and so that's what she wanted to do.
When she would train you in schoolwork, where would this take place?
In the dining room.
And you heard your brother describe an incident that he observed, or incidents that he observed, where she would grab papers away from you and tear them up?
Yes.
Would she do that?
Oh, yes.
And what would make her do that as far as you know?
Me not getting the right score on the test, she would sometimes time me or sometimes have me do handwriting tests. Usually timing or papers that I was going to turn in to school. And if she didn't like the way I did them, she would sometimes just rip them up.
Let's separate two things. Is there a difference between your mother training you in schoolwork with her own materials and tests that she'd give you and your homework that your teachers were assigning?
Yes.
Did she work with you on both?
Yes.
Let's focus on the homework first, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Did she supervise your homework?
Yes.
Did she on occasion do your homework?
Yes.
Did your father do your homework?
Sometimes.
The Spanish homework, for example.
Yes.
You heard Ms. Sharp testify that there was stuff being turned in that was very different than what was going on in class.
Yes, he
Who
would
was
do this.
Who was doing that?
My father.
And throughout your school career and in reading those comments, is it frequent that teachers have noticed that what was coming in from the home, essays particularly, was very different than your work on tests?
Well, it wasn't my work, so I think they noticed. I think they even commented to me sometimes about, they would do it in a sarcastic way about, your work at home is so good. Too bad you can't do that in class.
Now, was this by your choice that your parents were doing your work at home?
No, my mother had a program set where I had to turn in all of my writing assignments to her the day before.
And then she would do what?
She would look at them, go over them, correct them, and tell me how to rewrite them.
So she would change them. Is that right?
Yes.
And what you would turn in would be whose work?
My mom's.
Only hers?
Well, I would written the original paper, and then she had crossed out probably about half of it usually, and then rewritten.
Now, if you, in working on these assignments with her, if you'd rewrite them and you gave it to her and she didn't think you did it right or it wasn't good enough, what would she do?
She'd put me in the closet. She'd do that a lot more times than that, though.
We haven't gotten to the closet yet. What would she do with respect to the paper itself?
She would rip it up and throw it in the air and say, "You got to do this over. This is terrible. You're never going to embarrass me like this," and turn it in.
Now let's turn, now that would be on homework assignments, assignments from school.
Ones that she thought were unrepairable.
Let's turn to the training stuff, though. She gave you tests that she had
Yes.
obtained,
Yeah, they were like SAT form tests.
and were some of them reading comprehension type tests?
Yes.
And would she drill you in those tests?
Yeah, she had a stopwatch, and I would sit down and do the test, and sometimes she'd sit across from me, sometimes she'd walk around me, sometimes she'd go into the kitchen holding the watch. She'd hold it like this, and I would have to do the reading test.
And what would happen at the end of the test?
Well, she'd grade it, and I usually didn't do very well in those.
And what would she say?
She would tell me what a stupid kid I was and what a rotten job I had done, and this was just about how bad I had done.
Were there any experiences that you can remember where your mother was doing schoolwork with you that wasn't with her angry or critical?
No.
None.
When she was doing schoolwork or time tests? No, she always got angry.
Did she ever find the work that you did satisfactory or acceptable or good?
Once in a while. Once in a while. I'd always have corrections, but once in a while I did it okay enough to pass in her eyes.
But was she still critical?
On the mistakes that I did, yes.
Let's turn back to Friday before your parents were killed, okay?
Yes.
Did you tell your brother some of the details that you've told us here today?
Yes.
Particularly the stuff having to do with pain and stuff. Did you tell him that?
Yes.
What types of details do you remember, if you remember, telling Lyle about on Friday on the drive south?
I told him about the oral massages. I told him about the rough sex with the pins and the needles. I don't know if I told him about the knife. I told him about the knife when he threatened it at my throat.
No.
I told him about a lot of the threats that Dad had told me.
Okay. You said you don't know if you told him about the knife, and then you said you told him about the knife at your throat. What do you mean?
The knife during the rough sex.
The kitchen knife.
Yes.
The Rambo knife is not a kitchen knife.
No.
And why did you tell him those details out of all the details about your sexual activities with your father?
Because I was trying to explain to him why Dad had reacted the way he did. I
don't understand. What do you mean?
Lyle was questioning me about when it started, how it went on, and what happened in it. I wanted to convey to him probably why Dad was so upset and so willing for us to die rather than have this information released on Friday versus not. And so I was just telling him some of the things that used to happen.
Were you also trying to explain to him why you didn't or couldn't stop it?
Well, I explained to that, but that wasn't due to the rough sex.
Well, wasn't that due, however, to the threats and the fear?
Yes.
And wasn't rough sex scary?
Yes, that was very scary.
Were you trying to tell him the things that you thought were the weirdest?
Yes.
Your Honor, this would be a good place to stop for the day.
All right, we'll be in recess until tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Again, to the jurors, don't discuss this case with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll resume tomorrow at 9 o'clock.